Matters, a program by Mount Olive Lutheran Church here in Santa Monica, California. I am Pastor Shafer, the senior pastor here at Mount Olive. And each week we talk to interesting people from around the area and around the country and even around the world about the theme of hope. And today our guest is a longtime friend of mine, Pastor Ron Glusenkamp, who is, let's see, Ron, a pastor, an author, an amazing fundraiser, a jokester, a baker, candlestick maker. I don't know, all those things. And we'd like to talk about some of those today. And thank you for being with us today, Ron.
Thank you, Eric. And it's an honor and a privilege to be here. And I just want to say, wow, throughout the years, and we've known each other for a good long time, you've been such a leader in communications and in the parish now, and I love your congregation, Mount Olive. What a great place and space and the amazing things that you're doing there. So it's great to be with you today and have this conversation.
That's great. Thank you, Ron. So tell our viewers a little bit about, I want you to talk about what you've done in the recent past and the major fundraising, and then what you're doing now for our ELCA around the country.
Great. Well, in 2013 at the Churchwide Assembly, the assembly where Bishop Eaton from Ohio was elected the presiding bishop of the ELCA, another thing that happened there was that the church decided to have a bold notion that we were going to have a $192 million campaign, always being made new. And so that got kicked off in February of 2014 and concluded in June of 2019. And we were able to raise, with cash gifts and also planned gifts, $250 million. And I was the director of that campaign and had a fabulous staff and came to congregations like Mount Olive and visited people like Eric and Chris along the way. And, it was really amazing to see with this narrative sometimes that we have in the church about scarcity, it's not enough, that there really is abundance. And Dr. Walter Brueggemann talks about that so well, that started going on in the book of Exodus, in Genesis actually, that somehow, some way that there's this myth of scarcity, but there's also a liturgy of abundance. So we did that. And then at the Churchwide Assembly in Milwaukee in 2019, we celebrated God's generosity. And then I spent the next 5 or 6 months doing what I like to call the gratitude tour. I tell folks that I have the best job in the ELCA because I just get to go around and thank people for their generosity. And then since February, I've been the senior director of congregational mission funding. And what that really means is to kind of take a look at congregations like Mount Olive, or maybe some of the congregations that people who watch this program are members of, and to look at those congregations specifically as donors, as an entity, and to try to figure out how do the churchwide priorities fit in with their mission statement, with their goal, with their vision. And that's really pretty exciting, to look at congregations and see how they kind of act as kind of independently, but also corporately as a body.
Now, I know that you, in your life, share a passion that I do for the ELCA's World Hunger Appeal. And you've had an opportunity in your work to actually see the Hunger Appeal resources at work in the U.S. and around the world. I know that, and you get to speak about that. So talk to our viewers a little bit about the Hunger Appeal, if you will.
Certainly, thank you. Well, this is something that a lot of times when we talk to people and I say, how come your congregation, or how come you're so generous, with ELCA World Hunger? And they say, well, we think it's in our DNA. 97% of ELCA congregations have some kind of feeding or outreach ministry. And I think that really comes down to, the Gospel of John, where Jesus said, I am the bread of life. And then I think people across this church recognize what a good value, what kind of a great bang for the buck that people get when they invest in projects domestically and internationally with ELCA World Hunger. And, the tagline, and if I can say that, I know I can say that with you, Eric, that the tagline for ELCA World Hunger is creative and courageously working church to church toward a just world where all are fed. And there's a lot on that plate there, right? You know.
Yeah. Well, you know, when I talk to my congregation about the hunger appeal and the disaster appeal, and I'm able to say, because you're a member of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and we pay to be a member of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, these two fundraising efforts can give nearly all the money they raise to the cause, to disaster, to hunger. And I often say, where else can you say that? Nowhere. No other fundraising for hunger or disaster has the percentage of work that's in hunger and disaster that we have.
Yeah, it's a real blessing, and almost 5 decades now, you know, from the predecessor church bodies, that commitment, certainly throughout the life of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, world hunger has been at the forefront. It was the biggest entity priority for the campaign, $120 million, you know. So if you're going to raise $200 million or $250,000, and 120 of that is for ELCA World Hunger, if we were a college or a university, we'd be building buildings with that kind of money, you know, and nothing against colleges and universities. I mean, we need buildings, but what we're doing with that kind of money is building communities, and communities then transform the lives of moms and dads and kids. And so when you give to ELCA World Hunger, your gift has an amazing impact.
Right. And it's interesting, Ron, and you know, we could spend a whole interview on the hunger appeal, but it's interesting that this 50-year history, considering what's going on now in racial justice, the hunger appeal sprung out of the movement for racial justice in the old LCA. Action by churches together. You know, that's the history of it. It's real, which is really interesting that here we are again trying to deal with racial justice, and that was the genesis for this program.
Yeah, it's truly amazing. And if we can just stay there for a moment, like now with the pandemic, you know, and our team has been fortunate to work with tour guru, you know, Rick Steves, and who's a Lutheran. He's a member at Trinity up in Linwood in the state of Washington. And so, you know, we're doing a thing in a few weeks with him. And I asked him, I said, could you just tell me 3 truths that we know, you know, about this pandemic? He said, first of all, it's the poorest of the poor that get hit the hardest. Their lives are normally in crisis, and now it's crisis upon crisis. Secondly, the reality of it is, as horrific as COVID-19 is, and the deaths that it's going to claim and has already claimed here in the United States and around the world, more people are going to die from food insecurity and poverty than from the disease itself. And that's not to minimize, you know, the reality of COVID, but what it is to say is that the World Food Program has projected that before the end of 2020, hunger is going to double domestically and around the world. And thirdly, Rick Steve says, he's a big proponent and spokesperson for ELCA World Hunger, you know, is that if you're looking for bang for your philanthropic buck, ELCA World Hunger, just as you said, Eric, is the way to invest, is the way to go. So we were so grateful for people who do that. Our annual budget for ELCA World Hunger is about $21.5 million. And where we stand right now, kind of at the end of August numbers is what we have at the time of this taping, you know, is that we've received $10 million of that $21.5 million. Now, what I also need to note, in a normal year, and wow, we sure know that 2020 is it's not a normal year by any stretch of the imagination, but in a normal year, about 50% of our income for ELCA World Hunger comes in November, December, and January. So when this airs, you know, what's going to be great is that the folks who are watching this are going to be thinking about, hey, what can we do, you know, at the Reformation Sunday? What can we do in November? What can we do in December? I also want to say that we're probably about 10% behind where we were last year at this time. So we need to raise between now and the end of our fiscal year, which is the end of January 2021, we need to raise at least another $11.5 million. And of course, if we receive more, so much the better. I mean, we feel called to do that, but we even feel called to do whatever we can, because the people that we work with domestically and around the world, they can absorb at least another $5 to $6 million of generosity from us to put that into their programs, just to meet the need that's been exacerbated by COVID-19.
Well, and again, that's another program for us that we could have fun talking about.
Exactly.
Lots of fun talking about, actually, because we're preparing here in California, Ron, for the most challenging growth in homelessness.
Yep.
Because when the prohibition on evictions end, and we already have too many homeless people on the streets here, as much as the agencies I work with are housing a lot of people. But come a few months from now, hopefully many months from now, when that ends, you're going to see whole families, you're going to see elderly people, you're going to see people that you've never seen on the streets before. And it's very scary stuff. And this is COVID-19 related, no question.
Yeah, and what gives me hope, is that people like you and your congregation and people watching this program, when they meet and greet the folks on the street, that you actually see them.
Yeah,
and then you see them as Jesus. And you say then, okay, well, this is Matthew 25. When I was sick, you brought something to me. When I needed clothes or food, you brought clothes and food to me. When I was in lockdown because of pandemic, you visited me, or you helped my family. And so, the church is made for such a time as this.
that's right. And you've been here, we have some incredibly generous people, so that when I, in the last month, put out the word that there actually are hungry people in this neighborhood,
Right.
there are hungry people on our staff, the response has been amazing.
Yeah.
Wonderfully amazing.
And I want to applaud you too for the programs that you do, from an ecumenical and interfaith perspective as well. And Ephesians 4:4, there is one body and one spirit, just as you were called to the one hope of your calling. And I know that when you work with faith leaders and you're very engaged in your community there, that, hope is what it's about. And that's what we go into this time of year thinking about and bringing to people who probably have good reason not to have so much hope.
Ron, for those people, what gives you hope as you look ahead, as you're in the middle of COVID, which has hurt your ability to travel, to talk to people, but what gives you hope these days?
Well, I think what really gives me hope is the way that congregations have been responsive in trying to what I call delivering the goods, of their ministry. I think congregations have done, like yours, have done an amazing job of getting online and getting that word out, and then looking what are the various ways then that we can meet the needs of the community. And what that means, and what gives me hope, is that folks like yourself and others who are watching this leave the church building to go out into the community to find out what's going on, and then you're able to gather, and then you're saying, hey, we want to work toward this resolution in our community. And food and racial justice are connected to each other, as you pointed out, and we know that as people of God. So that gives me hope. People's generosity, gives me a great deal of hope, and all gifts, from the widow's mite to someone who might have a little bit more resources, when those are given to Jesus, and we hear this kind of formula, Jesus receives them, he takes it, breaks it, gives, there's leftovers. We rehearse this in the liturgy, and it's not just restricted to that bread and wine on the altar, but it's to our monetary offerings. And it's also to, more and more people, people who go to church, have a faith perspective, are more engaged with volunteer organizations.
Yeah. Well, I love that image that you just used because the leftovers from the miracle of sharing, among them are the feeling that people have who've given. The huge leftover of, the satisfaction of helping others. That people say, oh, thank you for doing this. No, it's helped me more than it has helped you. You must hear that all the time.
Oh yeah, and what really kind of buoys my spirit, if we're talking about like the feeding of the 5,000 that we had not too long ago, from Matthew 14, Jesus gets there and it says Jesus had compassion. Well, when you look at the original Greek word for compassion, it's ta splachna. And often we think of compassion as something, that's lodged here in our heart, or compassion that's somehow up here in my, cerebral working and everything. But ta splachna in the Greek is actually a little farther down in the body. Ta splachna is the lower intestines. And I had a pastor say to me, no pun intended, Pastor Ron, but it eats at us that people are hungry. It eats at us that people are hungry. So Jesus, it ate at Jesus. That's what that text literally means, that Jesus felt something in his gut. There was a punch to his gut when he saw the people who were hungry spiritually and physically. And then, the disciples, they do a quick needs assessment and they look around and say, there's not enough food here. There's just 5 bagels and 2 pieces of sushi. What is that among so many? And Jesus says, you give them something to eat. And they say, oy vey, us? We're supposed to do something here now? And so, when we hear that, that we get to be involved in being part of the bread of life and the distribution so that there are those leftovers. Hallelujah, right? Bon appetit.
Yeah. We've talked about the hunger appeal, and we should finish the commercial in the sense of, if you're watching this program and you are inclined to give to the ELCA World Hunger Appeal, there are many ways you can do that. The simplest way is through your ELCA congregation, if you're a member of an ELCA congregation. If you're not a member of an ELCA congregation, you can do it through the ELCA's website, elca.org. You can do it through our website, mtolivelutheranchurch.org. And if you're not a member of an ELCA congregation and want to send a check to Mount Olive, we'll make sure it gets to the ELCA World Hunger Appeal 100%.
Thank you, Eric, for that. And we have lots of information too, just to even go a little tighter there, elca.org/hunger. And there's lots of stories, there's videos, there's lots of ways to give. You can give during regular business hours by phone. You can send a check in. Like Pastor Eric said, you can send that to the congregation. We're not gathering or clustering too much physically. And the other thing I'd say that really helps buoy ELCA World Hunger is that I know some folks that have put ELCA World Hunger in their estate plans.
Yeah, that's us. I'll say that publicly. Chris and I don't have any children. Our other relatives are in great shape. So at the time we both die, 100% of our whatever assets we have left will go to the ELCA World Hunger Appeal. For us, that was a no-brainer, Ron. That was never even much of a discussion. We just said, well, sure. Why wouldn't we? So anyway, that's what we're doing. So,
well, thank you. And while we're on that, I just want to, you called me a baker. And so I want to show everybody who's watching, this is how I buy my yeast. It's in a pound bag. So during the pandemic, if you've been looking for yeast, it was at my house. Okay. But this is a great economical way, and when it says, for a packet of yeast, it's actually just 2 1/4 teaspoons. So there's a lot of 2 1/4 teaspoons in here. And so I can save money on yeast and give all that money more to ELCA World Hunger. But what I wanted to show was that, so I've been baking probably just about every day or every other day through the pandemic. And it's not really carbopalooza at my house, but what we do is that we give it away to the neighbors. And my wife is a faith community nurse at Augustana Lutheran Church in Denver. And so then she goes out and makes socially distanced, appropriate bread deliveries to people. And I've been working a lot on sourdough. And, in sourdough, there's a lot of times where there's this line around the bread. And people always want to know, well, how do you get that line around the bread? Well, you get it from putting it in a basket like this. And this is called a banneton. And you put the bread in there, and the dough conforms to the ridges. Now, if you look at this basket, it looks like an offering basket from Sunday school days, right? Or from camp. And that really is just to say, like what Eric and Chris have done with their estate, with their legacy, is that we are formed by our giving, and our giving shapes and forms us as well. And that goes back to a sense of what our value is, or what our sense of values are. And that value that we have is that, Jesus is the bread of life. And just 6 simple words, Jesus is the bread of life. And that just means everything. So thank you, Eric and Chris, and thank you everyone who's watching, who is given a gift or is going to make a gift because of this program, to ELCA World Hunger or to a hunger ministry in your community.
Thank you, Ron. Well, I think that's probably a good spot to be to finish up. Thank you, Ron, for being with us today. This is Hope Matters, a program of Mount Olive Lutheran Church in Santa Monica, California. Our guest today was Pastor Ron Glusenkamp, pastor, author, fundraiser, and friend. And so it's so good to have you with us today, Ron. Thank you for being with us. We believe in hope. We believe we have a God of hope, and we believe that hope matters. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.